Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project conceived to let me spend more time than I'd ever get on the radio with interesting people. And there's always quite a lot to cram in, but in the case of Dawn Butler MP, there is perhaps even more than usual. Dawn, welcome. Thank you for this. It's nice to see you. I just sort of beginning at the beginning. What exactly did your dad do? Because I've got, I mean, it's in the new book, obviously, parts of it. There's a lovely dedication to your dad at the front of the new book. I read one interview that had him as the sort of bakery king of Forest Gate, and then another one that said he worked on the railways. I've got a sense he did quite a lot, your old man.
Oh, my goodness. He was like jack of all trades and master of a couple.
Master of some.
So, but yeah, I mean, he absolutely did. He cut hair. So we had like a barber's chair in our house because he used to cut my brother's hair. So there was no going to the barbers for them. He was a baker. He worked on the railways. There's a lot of men that came over from the West Indies, worked on the railways. He worked for Matchbox when it was in Hackney, making little cars. So my brothers are going mad asking where those original cars are.
If they're still in the boxes, they'll be worth a fortune.
Worth a fortune. But he did so much. He was always busy. And there was always an element of giving back. Do you know what I mean? Like, he wouldn't just cut my brother's hair. He'd cut anybody's hair on the street who wanted, or anywhere else that wanted their hair cut. You know, he was always that kind of person.
You write about the sense of community growing up. You write about the way that, you know, people would be they'd know each other's lives and families in a way that perhaps isn't the case anymore.
Yeah, in and out of, you know, each other's houses, or, you know, being sent out to play on the street in our play clothes, obviously, and then not coming back until it was dark and no worries at all, you know. And that was the kind of street that I grew up in. And we did everything. Like, my neighbours, like Phil and Chris, a few doors down. Like, Phil was older. I used to sew seams down his jeans trousers because that was the fashion then. I used to use my mum's sewing machine and sew seams down it, you know, and make money from it, you know what I mean? And charge him I can't remember how much I used to charge him. But, you know, we would just do lots of things. There was always something happening.
Did your mum and dad come over together from Jamaica, or did they meet here?
No, my dad came over first.
Right.
They were together.
Oh, I see.
But my dad came over first to lay a foundation, really, for my mum to come over. So he came over. You know, he told me how sort of being lost, and then there was like, where are you going? I'll take you somewhere. And that's kind of how, you know, the West Indians were. Like, somebody would just take you somewhere and you'll meet a cousin of a cousin or something. And then, you know, he stayed in one room, and there was a few of them. They stayed in one room. And then when he saved up enough money, when he could get like 2 rooms, he then sent for my mum.
And one sister and 4 brothers.
One sister and 4 brothers.
Growing up, so a bit of a...
I grew up with, and my sister left home and she like, when I was 8. So I kind of grew up with a lot of very strong men.
Explains a lot.
What does it explain, James?
Well, it explains why you're not exactly shy of fighting your corner, are you, Dawn?
Yeah,
I think we could say with some confidence. And what was home like? I mean, I can see it as being quite knockabout, and you having to give as good as you gave with your brothers. But what were Milo and Ambrosine's attitudes to education, for example? Well,
there's a constant thread and saying that went through the house, go read a book. So whenever you complain that you complain that you're bored, go read a book. So there was, you know, you can never say you were bored or you've got nothing to do, because that would always be the thing that they would tell you to do. And in you'll find a lot of West Indian households, we had a lot of the same things, because only certain companies would sell to black families. So we had like an encyclopedia set that mum and dad spent, you know, so much money on for us, you know, for our education. And so it would always be like, go read a book. So they always wanted...
Did you go read a book? Not...
No, I didn't read it. The funny thing is...
It's all very well saying it.
Exactly. I would go to my room and start sulking.
Right.
I started reading the encyclopedias like a couple of years ago. I started reading, and it's really quite interesting about diction and
Yes.
language, and never have a firstly if you don't have a secondly. It's
Gosh,
all of
yes,
that kind of
course.
stuff.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting reading that again now. But there were strong advocates for education, but that was it. Like, it was up to us
Oh, okay.
to go to school,
Right.
and to educate and to be educated. That was the kind of thing.
So okay, because that with the immigrant experience, it can sometimes be very pressured, can't it? You know, the sacrifices we've made and the effort that we're making, you pay that back by excelling at school. It wasn't like that.
No, I mean, my parents, I think, always expected us to do well, even if they weren't following what we were doing at school, because they were too busy.
I was about to say they didn't have much time for the policing side of things,
just
did they?
working. And my dad wasn't really, they weren't really academics, if you like.
Yeah.
So their focus was working and providing for us. So we had something to eat, so we had clothes on our backs, and our job was to go to school and learn, really.
And what were you like at school? Let's start at primary school. No? Why are you sniggering?
Well, because it's quite interesting, because obviously the first chapter of the book I talk about cockroaches that fly.
This is the first time you were accused of lying, isn't it?
It's the first time I was accused of lying. And walking into school, you know, as like a 7, 8-year-old, and having this story to tell, and thinking that the teacher is going to enjoy what I've got to say because I've got something interesting to say. Cockroaches fly.
So, because you'd been back to Jamaica and you'd seen stuff you'd never seen before, and you couldn't wait to share it with the class.
Absolutely, because back in the day, after summer holidays, you get called to the front of the class, and you were asked, what did you do for your summer holidays? They don't do that anymore, because obviously that highlights if some people don't do things or they don't go on holidays.
Never thought of that.
So I was there and I was ready to tell my story. You know, I probably rehearsed it in my head a few times. It's going to be quite dramatic. And the teacher accused me of lying. And for me, I just felt, and that's the thing, you don't remember all of what was said, but you do remember how you felt.
Burning.
Yeah, and I felt sort of shame, and she cut my story sort of dead in its tracks, and I wasn't allowed to pursue what I had to say. And I had to make a choice. It was either sit down, stop lying and sit down and go back to your seat, or go outside the door of the class. And essentially what happens when you're outside the door of the class, the head teacher walks the corridors, and if they see a naughty kid outside the class, you then have to go to the head teacher's room, and then you get told off, whatever. And I just ran. I went out the classroom door and I ran out the door, ran into the playground, climbed the metal gates, went down on the wall, ran across the road, got my dad.
All the way home?
All the way home.
Well, what did your dad do?
He was fuming, because obviously I was in tears. I didn't cry in school.
Right.
I could feel it welling up. All the kids are looking at me, but I didn't cry in school. I cried, I think, as soon as I was at the door.
Safe.
Yeah. And my dad was fuming, and I just remember him taking my hand and marching into the school. And I don't remember any more after that, so I don't know what he said. I don't know what happened. I do remember that the teacher sort of never called me a liar again.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you think that still carries such weight with you today, that single X? We've all got them from childhood, the ones that actually still burn. If you approach it from the right or the wrong angle, you can still feel that sense, that echo from the past. Why this one?
I think because it was an accumulation of things. It was the first time, like, I had experienced something that I hadn't experienced before. I thought it was a bit exciting.
Right.
I came back, I told the story. I must have told the stories to my brothers, do you know what I mean? And their response and all of that. And I just thought I would get that response. So it was accumulation of not having the words to defend myself. And people say, oh, yes, but you're only 7, you're only 8. But the thing was, at that age, you don't realise that. All you know is that you have a story to tell and you want to tell your story and it's the truth. And I didn't have any other words to say, but I'm telling the truth, or you can't call me a liar. I didn't have those words in my vocabulary. I was just a kid. But I think it sticks in my mind because even as I've gotten older, I realise that is the system. So I might not be 8 years old anymore, but there are still systems where I'm still trying to break down. I'm still trying to say, look, I'm telling the truth here, and this needs to change, or you need to listen. And even though I have more words now and I have more of a platform, there is still that struggle and that fight every time I'm taking on a campaign, every time I'm trying to fight for something to change. There is still that kind of burning desire that I have to do this and I've got to make people listen.
And the kind of powerlessness in the face of a natural injustice would be part of it as well. That first, did you think you were being treated differently from how other little girls would have been treated?
I think so my mum, when I was talking about, and this is the interesting thing, as you know, sort of writing a book, this is my first book I've ever written, but then you start having conversations with people, you start saying, oh, what do you remember? Yeah. And then my mum remembered that I was a child that would stick up for other children. So there was a child who was being bullied and the teacher didn't say anything. And then as soon as she reacted, the teacher told her off and sent her off. And I stood up in class and said, hang on a minute, why didn't you do that? I mean, obviously, I was a problem for teachers at my school. I can recognise that as an adult. So I think, I don't know why, but it's obviously my upbringing. I started a homework club when I was 5 years old. It's obviously my upbringing. When I think about me as a child, you think, really? You're mad, you're crazy. This is a crazy thing to do. But, yeah.
It's just who you were.
It's just who I am.
Were you good at the subjects? Were you good at the academic stuff?
Yeah, but I think I got bored quickly. So I was one of those kids in school that would finish their work and then be bored. So I was probably then after that, if I'm honest, I was probably a little disruptive.
Okay, because you'd start messing about a bit,
because I'd finished
your friends.
Yeah.
And did you make friends easily?
Yeah.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, always.
How conscious, before we get to secondary school, how conscious were you growing up of the duality of having, if you like, two homes, of the old country? Was it wouldn't be going home for you when you went back to Jamaica, but it would be in a sense for your mum and dad?
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting because whenever you go to Jamaica, people would be saying, oh, you're a butler, oh, you're such and such as your cousin, oh. So you always had a
cousin. It's like Ireland.
Yeah, exactly, it was. And actually, I remember tracing back, when I used to work for the GMB, tracing back some of my roots to Ireland, because Kilkenny in Ireland. And I think there's a castle in Ireland that I've got a right to, I think, a bit.
Good luck with
that. but it's... So there was always this feeling of this is a safe space with lots of family. And I remember food tasting different, then I was insisting, my mum used to have to bring baked beans in the suitcase because, I was like a fussy eater. I needed to have baked beans. I wouldn't eat the, food and drink. And chicken didn't taste like chicken. I'm like, well, that doesn't taste like chicken, but it was fresh chicken, like from the land. It tastes as chicken's supposed to taste, not what that I was used to. So there was always, yes, a feeling of home and safety. And I think, looking back, probably seeing how important it was for my parents to reconnect. The whole point of my parents coming to the UK was they weren't going to stay long. They were going to go back in 5 years. Right. They didn't plan to stay in England for life.
Why did they?
Because Mum had kids. Like more kids in
the roots just kept extending into the ground, as it were.
Yeah, that's right.
And then secondary school. So was that more of the same? Again, sort of, because we should you didn't go to university, which you mentioned a couple of times in the book, because I think you're still conscious of that in some ways, because it
You're always asked that as a politician. You're always asked, "Did you go to university?" What? No,
which one did you go to?
Did you?
It's a basic presumption that you did.
They say, "Which one did you go to?"
Yes,
and then you have to say, "Well, I didn't go to university," and it's like. I remember being interviewed, one of the first interviews, like political interview, and somebody said to me, "What was it like growing up poor?" And I said, "I don't see myself as growing up poor. I feel like I was," and they don't want to accept that I have a different life and a different outlook on things.
But why? I mean, because you're clearly very bright, and school. At primary school, as you say, you possibly found it a bit easy and then you'd knock it on there. Did you never find a kind of intellectual nourishment? Was there never, did you, what were you doing between 11 and 18?
No, I mean, I wanted to leave school.
Straight, I guess the sense I get is you didn't really see the point of it.
No, and the teachers didn't.
Dale Vince, I interviewed Dale Vince, you know, the eco-tricity guy who's given money to the party and he was exactly the same as you, just didn't really fit with any of his ambitions or any of the things that he thought he wanted to be doing.
Yeah, and the teachers were not I didn't feel like the teachers were interested in teaching me.
Okay.
They weren't interested in taking note of anything I was doing or saying. I think, as I say, looking back and journeying back, I probably had a reputation of being quite disrupted or troublesome.
I want to pin this down then. So what word would you use? Because disruptive and troublesome covers a multitude of sins. Would you talk back a lot in class? Were you
always questioning?
But that can be good. Well, some teachers hate it, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
And questioning sometimes in a mischievous way, like in a.
But I would question things that I felt needed questioning.
Right.
Whether it was something we were being taught.
Okay, and so they'd be like, "Oh, for God's sake, just let me get on with the class, will you?"
Yeah. You weren't allowed to question. You weren't allowed to be inquisitive. That wasn't something that was coming from me that they appreciated. Maybe coming from somebody else, they might have appreciated it, but coming from me, they didn't appreciate it.
Okay. And, I mean, at what point do you become conscious of being treated differently because of your colour? Or is it always there in some sense?
I think, in a way, it's always there, but you don't identify it. So you know that there's something different. You know you're being treated differently, but you can't quite put it into words. You can't quite identify why that is. And as you get older, when you realise that people view... Because I grew up on a multicultural road, but as you get older and you realise that there's discrimination against black people, then you realise, oh, it could be the colour of my skin that why they're treating me the way that they're treating me. So when there's a bit in the book where I talk about when I swapped homework with my friend Andrea, so we used to have a competition who could write the smallest and the neatest. So we had it was just I don't know what it was, but it was fun right then. Yeah. But our writings were almost identical, super neat, tiny little handwriting. And so I decided that we should, because I suspected that the teacher was undermarking me.
Right.
So me and Andrea swapped homework.
Yeah.
And she was a straight A student. And I was like a B, C. And she got an A.
For your work.
For my work. And I think I got a C or maybe even a D.
Right.
I can't remember what I got. I can only remember the fact that she got an A and I didn't. And I was like, that is my A.
Yeah.
I want my A. And she was like, oh, you can't do that. You're going to get me into trouble. We're going to get into trouble. And I didn't care. I was like, no, I want my A. And then after like a lot of tears,
yes,
I decided I wouldn't claim my A. But it proved to me the feeling that I had that I was being discriminated against.
Gosh. It's an early equivalent of names on a CV, isn't it? When
That's
you
right.
submit a name on a CV.
Exactly.
So I'm fascinated by this. What did you do? I mean, what did you get excited about in your teenage years? What was the kind of...
Well, I was a very good runner.
Right.
But then when the teachers told me that I should focus on running and not on anything academic, I gave up running.
Because, well, this is just authority that you don't like. You don't like being told what to do. But you were okay being told what to do at home. You were, I mean, normal levels of rebellion at home, not excessive levels of rebellion.
Yeah, no, you couldn't have excessive levels
No.
in a West Indian home.
Well, that's what I mean, you know, I get that. But at school, the minute anybody told you to do something, you would do the opposite. Even if you'd never thought of not doing it, the minute they told you to do it, you wouldn't do it.
Well, it was because I thought, why do you want me to focus just on running and not anything academic? It was like, for me, it felt like they were limiting any ambitions I might have. And I remember being told when we went to, what was it called, when you had like a career advice and somebody would come in. And I remember somebody telling me that, you know, I should learn to touch type because I'm never going to amount to more than a secretary if I'm lucky. And I just thought...
It's just obnoxious.
Yeah, I just thought, why are you underestimating what I can do?
Yeah.
But it did take like one teacher, Mr. Taylor, to see my potential.
What did he see?
I think he saw that I was clever and very abstract at the same time.
Yeah.
And he was like, you need to apply that to computing.
Okay.
Computing is the direction you need to go because you like to figure things out, you like to question. And so, you know, I started programming and I went into computing because of him.
And you had an immediate facility for it?
Immediate.
That's interesting, isn't it? Quite rare as well for a woman at the time.
Well, exactly. I mean, and it was very male-dominated profession. And that's why, in the end, I left as well, because I just got sexually harassed every day.
Did you really? We've jumped ahead a little
Sorry.
bit. No, it's your life. You can jump where you want. But, so that explains you wanted to get out of school and get to work then, and when you got your head around computing, that would have been daft to go into further education when you could just go out and start earning.
Well, yeah, I went to college, studied programming, and then me and my friend, Claudia, we decided that we would apply for all of these kind of well-paid jobs. And we thought we'd never get it. And so we applied for all these jobs. And then I went for an interview and I got the first job I applied for. I was like, damn, okay, let's start earning some money. So I just jumped into work and started earning money. I remember buying myself a really expensive pair of boots and wearing them to work every day. And they were ruined in about 2 weeks. Didn't last me a month. But yeah.
Because they weren't designed for daily
They
work.
weren't designed for work.
What year are we in
now? They weren't designed for walking.
What year? Yes, Nancy Sinatra. What year was this? What year did you start work?
Oh my gosh.
Roughly.
I started work when I was about 19. I can't remember what year that was.
Okay. So this I mean, the thing I'm not getting yet is the notion of ambition. So if I'd met you when you were 16 and I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would you have said?
Oh, I had lots of business ideas.
Did you?
Yeah. So I was very much entrepreneurial. I would have said that I wanted to be a wedding planner, be a children's presenter, and probably have my own show at 16.
Fair enough.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. And then sort of no mention of politics. And
no
mention of politics at home either. Did you talk about politics much at home?
In an abstract kind of way. So this is what I always found quite interesting when people try to label me and put me in a box. Because my politics comes from my life and the life that I lived and how particularly my dad was treated and treated other people. And so for me, my politics is a sensible, caring, compassionate kind of politics. And if people want to say that's socialism, then cool, I'm all good with that. To me, that's not a dirty word.
Help for people who need help.
Absolutely. And so, and not just the minimum. You know, so there's a bit where I talk about, you know, we used to have homeless people come to the bakery and my dad would go and get a fresh roll for them, the freshest roll, the nicest cake he would go and get for them. And I'll be like, okay. And my dad was like, just because they're hungry, you don't want to give them like a stale roll because they need to be grateful. You want to give them something nice to eat. And for me, I think that was just the beginning of my socialist ideas and views, if you like.
Yeah.
So people try to sort of put me into this box, but it wasn't. My dad was a trade union official, unofficial, because they wouldn't elect him as a black man to be a trade union official back in the day. But he was the one that was helping everybody.
Right. So he
work.
became a sort of de facto shop
That's
steward.
right.
And there's so much going on, isn't there?
A lot
in your
going on.
childhood. There's
Yeah.
so many different
Yeah.
influences coming to bear, and
Yeah.
you're absorbing as much as
Yeah.
kind of learning. Some of it's just absorbing. It's coming into you by osmosis almost. It's
Yeah.
and that makes sense, I guess. So normally you say, and when did you first become politically inspired? But you're just talking about how people interact with each other, which
That's
is
right.
the purest definition of politics in a way.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And this is when I go into schools and I say that you don't have to study politics to get into politics, but for me, you do have to do good things.
So when did you become aware of the formal side of things? So did you go straight from computing to the trade union, to the GMB? Was that...
I took time out.
Right.
So I took like a year out, and
We shouldn't gloss over what you said about sexual harassment, actually, because that sounds pretty grim.
yeah, it was. But I was working in a male-dominated field, and I was a young woman.
Right.
And when you look back, you think, well, yeah, it was
Was it lots of men, or was it one man in particular? And just made your life unbearable?
made my life hell.
And could you complain?
I tried.
And nobody was...
I tried to complain. I went to HR. It kind of wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing to... Sexual harassment wasn't taken very seriously. And in the end, I stopped wearing skirts, any form of skirts, and just wore trousers for
Right.
like 4 years, because that was the way to stop him sort of looking up my skirt every day. And so that was my way of protecting myself from the harassment. Yeah.
I'm surprised by that, but not when you say there was actually nothing you could do, because you never shy away from a fight. You're never reluctant to stand up for yourself, but there comes a point, a bit like when you were in the classroom being called a liar, where where can I go?
That's right.
Run back to my dad. That's literally all I can do.
That's right. I did everything that I could, and that's why trade unions are so important.
Yeah, of course. There's a natural progression, isn't
That's
there, from
right.
workplace abuse into trade
That's
union
right.
representation.
Because when your voice is not loud enough, when you've used all the levers you have within your power to try and change the system and it's not working, you need the mighty force of an additional set and group of people. And that's why it was important.
So you took some time off.
Took some time off to heal, and I raised lots of money for various charities, because that's what I loved organising. I loved helping people. I honestly believe that I created the format for X Factor, and I feel like that was stolen from me as one of my ideas. And I remember writing to ITV, BBC, said, look, I've got this great format idea. This is what we used to do. We used to put on these shows, and then the audience will vote, and then whoever won got time at the studio to record that. So it was all there. I did that
Outrageous.
many years ago. Absolutely outrageous. I'm going to speak to Simon Cowell.
Well, and then you went into the trade union. We've skipped a bit, haven't we? We've skipped another very formative experience for you, which I know your brothers. So I didn't ask whether Mum and Dad spoke to you about discrimination. Did they prepare you for it, or was it just?
They were more resilient. So my mum was more sticks and stones, they break your bones, but names will never hurt you. It was more of that kind of line. My dad very much made me aware that discrimination exists. But yeah, my brothers were the one that taught me resistance.
But you know, it's a funny attitude generationally to racism, isn't it? Because your parents' generation just thought it was inevitable, I think, and that it was just something that you had to put up with.
Yeah, and they didn't want us to see all the racism they suffered.
Right.
They didn't want it to affect us that bad.
Because what good would it do? And it's similar to when you were talking about sexual harassment, actually, is that, for decades women thought that's just what we have to, if you want to be in the workplace, that's what you have to endure,
Exactly
that's what you have to put up with. And this is a driving theme of your book, the idea that we don't have to put up with stuff and that we can change it.
That's right.
Which is why you keep mentioning pigeonholes. The idea that everybody is compartmentalisable. I think I just invented that word. And we shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't be like that. Right. So your brothers spoke to you about the police when you were quite young. Your brothers briefed you on the fact that your experience would not be the ones that were generally seen on television, where if you're lost in a market, you go and find a police officer. That because you were a black family, the relationship you have with the police is very different and generally not, at the time, not known except to you and your family. It wasn't a publicly available information, so it's passed on. That's right. As experience.
That's right. The talk.
The talk, is it a thing that? Is it right? Yeah. Give me a lowdown on the talk, just a quick.
It was very much never be alone with a police.
With a police officer. Right.
If you're driving, I got this talk when I was probably about 13, 14, before I even started driving. If you're driving, always look in your rearview mirror. If a police car passes by, to see if the police car does a U-turn and is following you. If a police car starts following you, make sure you stop in a safe public place where there's lots of people where you feel safe.
And you write about driving while black in the book. And then you were driving while black when you were about 18.
Yeah.
Not so much that you were pulled over, but rather that you still thought you should and would call the police if you found yourself, or if your brother found himself in a tricky situation.
Yeah.
I found this story very upsetting.
Did you? Oh, why?
Because I think I can feel the trust being taken away from you. The sense that this is what you do in this sort of situation, and you learnt very quickly that doesn't work.
Yeah. It's like, it is a huge thing. And I felt, and only recently because of George Floyd, I felt so much guilt that I could have been responsible for killing my brother because I called the police when they'd told me not to. So I know we've sort of jumped to the end of the story there. But yeah, and the other thing, one of the newspapers asked me for some pictures. And so I was looking at the pictures, and I didn't realise, so I went to, let's do the story from the beginning, drove to a party down the road. This white guy was obviously upset that there was a party going on next to him. He came out of his house, he broke my car window, and he slashed my roof with a knife. I didn't remember that until I saw the pictures from this book.
Gosh.
Yeah. And so I got my friend to go and get my brothers, because that's always the first thing that you do. That was always the first thing I was taught to do. And my brother came and he tried to talk to the guy, but the guy came out with a knife and tried to stab my brother. And I was then quite frantic, and I was like, oh my God, they're going to kill my brother. So I must have gone to the telephone box to call the police, and the police came and immediately arrested my brother and took my brother away. And then I was hysterical because I was just shouting like, my brother's innocent, this guy, he still had the knife in his hand. How can you arrest my brother when this guy still got the knife in his hand? How does that make sense? And I think eventually they did arrest the guy. And eventually I got a letter of apology from the police for their actions. But my brother still has the scars.
Which you didn't know until you rang him.
I didn't know until George Floyd. When I was like, bro, do you remember when that situation happened? And he was like, sis, do I remember? I still have the scars. And then he told me that the police had knelt on his back, on his neck. They were just kneeling on him in the van. And that's when I just started crying, because I thought I could have lost my brother because I called the police.
It's a trite observation of mine, but the difference that camera phones have made
Yeah.
is you can't measure it, can you, really? Because you'd have had one now in that circumstance.
That's right.
The footage that comes out, how do you process it when...
But even with the footage, James, people still
see what they want to
deny.
See. That's what I was about to ask you. I was about, how do you process the denial? How do you process the rejection of the word institutional when your personal experience is so... I mean, it's like telling someone that the Earth's not round, but you've got people in very senior positions of power. You've got people in the current cabinet who will tell you when it comes to institutional racism, the world's not round. There's no such thing. And some of them, of course, are people of colour.
Yeah. It is beyond frustrating.
Yes.
And this is why I talk about... Because what I find often is that when you talk about racism, people become defensive, they put walls up, it's an immediate, I'm not racist, or you're always talking about racism, I'm the one with the problem, I've got a chip on my shoulder. So I juxtapose this with, I talk about women, because it seems like people accept that difference more readily. So I say, if you've got a woman who's beaten and bruised, and she's talking about domestic abuse and domestic violence, and you've got another woman who says, I've never suffered any form of violence in a relationship at all, would you believe that woman who says domestic violence does not exist over the woman who's there battered and bruised telling you that domestic violence exists? And not just that, the fact is that a woman is killed every 3 days by a man, by a partner or former partner. So why would you believe the woman who says domestic violence doesn't exist? And it's exactly the same with racism.
Of course it
Just
is.
because you've got a black person who says racism doesn't exist, why would you believe that black person over a black person that's telling you racism does exist and I'm trying to make it better, I'm trying to change the system, I'm trying to eradicate racism from society, which is a constant endeavour.
Well, do you know, we were talking about the homophobic attack in South London on the radio show yesterday, and two gay police officers rang in to say they've never experienced homophobia, and they were kind of, one of them was victim blaming a bit and saying, I dress and act in a way that no one would know I was gay, and the other one was simply just saying, well, I've never experienced it, as if in brackets they're saying everyone else must be exaggerating or it doesn't exist at all. It's the same thing, isn't it? What are they trying to do, do you think? You must think about this quite a lot. What are they trying to reassure themselves that they're not going to be, I mean, obviously I'm thinking of Suella Braverman at the moment, and almost as if she's trying to prove to people who might be racist that she's one of them, it seems sometimes. What do you think the explanation is?
I think they're kidding themselves and are extremely delusional in thinking that they will be seen differently when push comes to shove. Yeah. Because ultimately that's what it is. Like, ultimately, they get promoted because of the things that they're saying. So you couldn't really have a white Home Secretary saying the sort of things that Suella's saying and get away with it that easily, I don't think. So it's very strategic of the government to place people with those kinds of views and meddling in those positions. And
it's the articulation more than the view, you're right, isn't it? It's that sense of being able to go a little bit further. You were the first black woman to speak at the Dispatch Box in the House of Commons. Well, it's because
did you know that, though?
Before I read the book?
Yeah. Because it's not talked about, is it?
I don't think I did, actually. I didn't. I think I would have had you... I'd have had you in third as a black woman MP after Diana Nuna King. But no, I didn't. And I know, of course, the nice vignette is Sadiq making quite a big deal out of it and making sure that the House of the Speaker properly recognised that this was a moment. I mentioned that in the context of talking about the current Home Secretary because they turn it into an achievement to say this is the first, female Home Secretary of colour, or Liz Truss's top 3 appointments were all from ethnic minorities, weren't they? But under what you've just said about people who are actually denying the reality for most others, it's a fairly worthless. Not worthless, that's not the right word, and it's certainly not for me to say. But it should have been a bigger deal when you were the first black woman to speak at the dispatch box in the House of Commons.
Yeah, I feel that it should. And looking back, and this is why I talk about it now, and not so coy about talking about it, because that could have easily be erased from history.
Yeah.
And if I don't talk about it, or my mum, nobody else is going to talk about it.
So we're back. So now we get to the union bit, and I can see some, your personal experience would have informed it slightly, and your dad's approach to helping people, and your attitude, raising a lot of money for charity, just thinking, okay, there's actually a job where you can try to make people's lives better. How did you get into it? What was the journey into the GMB?
So I started working in the employment service, so a civil servant, and then I encouraged everybody, all of my team. I was a manager in the employment service, and I encouraged them all to join a trade union. They were all panicked, thinking, why does she want us to join a trade union? She must be a horror of a boss. And I was explaining to them, this is this is a good thing for you, for your own personal protection. And then I became more and more active in the trade union movement. And then I unionised almost the whole workforce, which you shouldn't do as a manager, of course.
It makes your own life much more difficult, doesn't it?
It does, but I think if you're a good manager, you've got nothing to fear.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then I basically was asked if I would become a recruitment officer for, it was PTC then, so
right, yes.
Civil Service Union.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, why not? Because I'm doing it anyway. I'm enjoying doing that. And I became their first recruitment officer. And then I got headhunted for the GMB to be a GMB recruitment officer and then full-time official.
And then someone came along after a couple of years and floated the notion of politics, which had never previously occurred to you, ever. No point in your life where you thought,
I want to be an MP.
No, never. No. You still wanted to have your own TV show. Yeah. You still do, I think.
Still do.
And what was your initial reaction was scepticism? Or?
Yeah, I thought, why do I want to be a politician when nobody likes politicians?
Yeah.
And nobody looks like me or sounds like me. Like, I was working class girl from East London. And I just thought, I don't think that's for me, because I like to do things that I enjoy as well, that I completely believe in, 100%. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's what encourages me to keep going. That gives me energy. And I thought, this isn't really for me. And then what happened, when I stood in Hackney, I realised I could do this and I could be the politician that I want to be. Like, I can do this my way. I didn't think politics had that scope for me to do it my way.
Okay. So you could make it bespoke.
Yeah.
You could make your own, you could be you.
Yeah.
In politics.
In politics. I thought I could do that.
As opposed to having become something else to do politics.
That's right.
And have you? Has it worked?
In the beginning, in the early days, it was very much a shock. Walking into Parliament and thinking everybody was kind of progressive kind of thing, and realising that wasn't the case. Thinking that
That was a bit naive of you.
I know.
I mean, particularly looking at some of the crusty old geezers on the Tory benches.
The first time I suffered racism in Parliament, I came home upset with myself. I was upset with me.
For not knowing it was going to happen.
Yeah, for not preparing myself. It's like, what do you mean? I was so upset with myself, thinking, you went into that workplace, 650 MPs, only 2 black women. You didn't think you were going to get racially abused?
Yeah. What happened? What was the first one?
The first one, I mean, there were so many instances of people not believing I'm an MP, even though I'm wearing my badge. People asking me for my badge, even though it's around my neck, all the time, right? So then, and I noticed that none of the other MPs wore their passes.
Really?
I say badge, passes.
Sure.
None of the other MPs wore their passes. They never got stopped, right? I was wearing my pass, although proudly. I was an MP, I made it. I was wearing my pass. I kept being asked to show my pass and everything. So in the end, I stopped wearing my pass because I thought, if they're going to ask me to show my pass anyway, I might as well have it in my pocket.
Yeah.
Because everybody else has got theirs in their pocket.
And who's they?
Oh, the police in Parliament.
Yeah.
And the guards.
Right.
Yeah.
Just prove your right to be here.
Yeah. Might prove that I belong here. Some people would call me Diane all the time, constantly. And I'd be like, me and Diane are two very different individuals.
People in your own party as well?
Occasionally, but not so much.
Okay. And then the famous incident with David Heathcote Amory.
Yeah.
Which I found the aftermath of that, actually, almost as shocking as the original insult to you when he challenged you, didn't he, on the terrace?
Yeah.
Essentially saying that you had no right to be there because it was members only.
Yeah.
And you said, I am a member, and he said, they're letting anybody in nowadays.
I know.
But when he tried to justify it afterwards, I mean, I'm quite naive. I'm not as naive as I used to be, but obviously I've grown up as a public school educated straight white male, so I'm conscious of some of my privilege, although almost certainly not all of it. But it was the use of the word "they," Dawn, in this sentence that even now I kind of still went, what? When he said, well, I was actually, I didn't recognise her as a new MP. I simply asked her what she was doing at that end of the terrace. And they are quite sensitive about this kind of thing.
Exactly.
They think that any kind of reprimand from anyone is racially motivated. I mean, you know, I couldn't believe my eyes.
Yeah.
2008, that was.
And he said it like, so those people that claimed I was making it up, I was over-exaggerating, this is what he said to the newspaper.
That's right, yeah.
As his response.
They.
So you can imagine all that sort of visceral and all that aggression and you know, racism that was spewing out of him at the time, if that is his defence to the newspaper.
That's incredible, actually.
And again, James, I didn't actually expect him to admit it, let alone give a statement like that.
And that's another, I mean, you mentioned it again, that recurring theme of not being believed. You write about it as, because if you admit it, you've got to change it. You've got to be part of the process of change. And it's therefore for everybody.
That's right.
Sometimes to deny it, it's not that bad, it's the race card. When I started at LBC, I couldn't believe how often people would talk about the race card as if everyone complaining about racism is the problem, as opposed to racism being the problem. So, but it's a generous analysis, isn't it? Because it doesn't make you a racist to deny that racism exists. It just makes you someone who is conscious that if you do admit it, you're going to have to do something about it.
That's right.
And that's why they call you a liar.
That's right.
And it still hurts just as much as it did when you were 8.
Yes. Because you kind of think things will change. You don't think that you'll get to an age where you're still fighting the same battles and fights in the education system, in the NHS, in politics, but you're still fighting the system. So you think to yourself, what do we need to do to generate that change so that the next generation doesn't have to suffer?
And I was interested to read your account, really, of being removed as chair of the Labour Women's Group, which you describe as a coup, and Harriet Harman and Jess Phillips, you feel treated you very shabbily. There's no fear or favour in the fights that you pick, is there? If you feel that someone is you don't care whether they're a crusty old Tory backbencher or whether they're a grand dame of the Labour movement.
Yeah, because it's things that need to change.
Which is the subtitle of the book. It's what I've learned about breaking barriers and inspiring change.
Yeah, because there are other young black female MPs coming into Parliament, and I want them to be treated better than how I was treated. I don't want them to have to go through what I've gone through. Otherwise, what's the point? I am not one for putting up the ladder or closing the doors. I'm one for, like, opening it all out to everyone and say, look, come on, let's all do this together. For me, I want to move forward through the next phase of life, with others. I don't want it to be so separated or compartmentalized. We're supposed to be in this sort of feminist movement together. We're supposed to be fighting the same fight together. We're supposed to be fighting for equality and equity. This is. So you can't do that only on one level or for one group. Otherwise, how is that fair?
I know the book was inspired partly by you taking stock of your existence after being diagnosed with breast cancer, which is now happily behind you. Would it have been a very different book if that hadn't happened? I mean, because a lot of this sounds to me as if it's been germinating since you were a tiny little girl. A lot of it has. That's why I use the word osmosis to describe absorbing. But was there a sense of reckoning? Was there a sense of working stuff out rather than just acting on it?
Yeah, I think when lots of things happened in Parliament, and I remember sort of being told Parliament's not going to change, so you're going to have to live with it. Don't bother questioning anything.
Like women in sexual harassment back in the day.
Exactly, just live with it. And me just trying to get my head around everything and being, a new MP, it's really busy. I'm always working. So there was all of that I had to come to terms with. And I remember when the coup happened, I remember talking to some MP saying, I'm going to go public with this. And they said, oh, no, don't do that, because that will be it. Your political career will be cut dead. It'll be over. So don't do that. But yes, I think having fought cancer and coming through that battle, I'm like, I'm not keeping anybody's dirty little secret. And I need things to change, and I need the system to change and structures to change. And so I'm going to tell the truth. And I'm okay with that.
Because and I will. If it's not out there, the change can't begin.
It can't begin because everybody's in denial or they're covering up.
Why you? Why is that role fallen to you?
God, so many people. Like my family says that all the time.
Do they?
Why you, Dawn?
Yeah.
You can let this one go. Why me? If not me, then who? And it's because I can. I don't tackle every single racist act that happens towards me. I don't tackle it all the time or talk about it all the time. I do let some things go. This is just a fraction. I mean, in the book, I remember like when I was writing the publisher said, okay, Dawn, that's enough now.
Okay.
And then
I've never had that problem. I've got the opposite. Is that it? But you're surprised sometimes by the reaction that your interventions get. I particularly enjoyed your role in making sure that ridiculous character Toby Young wasn't able to persist in working on a student body after he'd regularly and delighted in tweeting all sorts of vile misogyny and jokes about rape and anal rape, actually. And I mean, it lasted about 24 hours, but he came after you with the full force. The sort of Spectator group behind him. That does that get to you? I mean, is there ever a moment where you think, wind your neck in, Dawn, because then my head wouldn't be so far above the parapet?
Oh yeah, sometimes. I mean, I've deleted more tweets than I've sent. Yeah. But it was particularly scary with Toby Young because of how violent some of his followers are.
Well, I've attracted the attention of similar people, but again, I'm a straight white bloke, so it's going to be different, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. And it comes through thick and fast. And so I tend not to scroll, which is sad because sometimes I miss some really nice messages. But when that Peddy guy, when he said, can someone tell me why she didn't deserve a bullet to the back of the head? And we just put that forward as another complaint and everything for that to be investigated by the police. And that was one of Toby's followers. And then when the police called me and they said, we're just calling to update you and to let you know that we've been to his house and we've confiscated his guns. I just froze.
Of course.
And there was a tear coming down my eye. I didn't even know I was crying. And they were like, "Are you still there, Miss Butler? Madam, are you still there?" And I said, "Sorry? You confiscated what?" I said, "He had a gun. Legally owned." But I just thought, wow.
Because we say to ourselves, it's just some lonely old dickhead in his mum's back bedroom with a laptop computer, but that just kind of blew the lid off that comforting thought.
Yeah. And he was political. He stood for,
yes,
I think it was UKIP, I think he stood for.
But it doesn't cow you.
No, because then they win.
So you have to marshal your forces and rise again. We go again.
Yeah.
And then again on the theme of justice, the probably particularly Dawn Butler's greatest hits. Then we've got the Boris Johnson moment, haven't we? Getting thrown out of the House of Commons. Yeah. I loved that. I think I spoke to you at the time. I think
you were the only radio.
Was I?
Yeah.
Well, again, it should have drawn rather, because what I was struggling with at the time was the fact that you were so obviously right, which meant that Parliament was somehow wrong, and yet even people on your own side were. You're right about people not followed, but just noticing that some people had kind of stepped back on social media, had unfollowed you, or just people thinking, I don't want to be adjacent to that sort of troublemaking. But it wasn't driven by a desire to make trouble or attract attention. There was a sort of frustrated howl that someone could lie so much and so obviously in Parliament and not have any mechanism. A bit like back in the office when HR, you complain about something and there's no actual...
That's right. And it was
system. The system is not up to the challenge of this egregious act.
That's right. The system was not built for... And our democracy isn't built for the weight of someone like Johnson. Or
Trump. I mean, the American Constitution has the same problem, doesn't it?
That's right. He showed us all of the gaps, that everything that's wrong with our system, he showed us, because he was allowed to lie with impunity. His ministers were allowed to lie, and there was, the ministerial code means nothing if the Prime Minister won't act on it. So it showed everything that was wrong with our democracy and our system. And I couldn't believe. So I'm like, hang on a minute. This is me talking to myself, like at home in my bedroom. Like, hang on a minute, Dawn. You're part of the system. You're part of that system. You're part of a system that's not working. So are you just going to pretend and just allow it to continue, or are you going to do something about it? And I thought, I need to do something about it. I just can't live with this anymore. I need to. And before then, that was the end of a very long road of probably 6 months of me moving all these different levers. Can we do this? Going to the clerks. Can we do this? Going to Keir. Can you put forward an opposition day debate? So if you name somebody in Parliament, so if we name saying we're going to have a debate on the Prime Minister's conduct, we could then call him a liar in Parliament and not get thrown out. But we would have to use one of our opposition day debates to make that happen. Never happened. No. Like 3 months later, I'm like, what's happening? Why are we not doing this? And in the end, I thought, what can I do? I cannot force people to take this seriously. What can I do? And then that's why I did it.
And people still didn't take it seriously.
Oh my God, yeah. Like in the beginning, they were coming for me.
Both quite enthusiastically.
Yeah. And I just thought, am I going crazy?
This was real parallel universe stuff for a lot of people, I think, where you'd sit there thinking, this can't be right. But you'd then marched up to it and marched up to the issue and said, given it a shake, and you became the problem.
Yeah. It's like, how... And I couldn't understand. I mean, obviously,
it's still mad, right?
My whole life.
It's still mad.
I don't know why people are not on the streets marching every day and protesting. I really don't. I think, can you not see what this government is doing? Total shock. But I couldn't believe that people were. Did I do it to embarrass the Deputy Speaker? What?
A Labour MP said that to you, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like the conspiracy theories, like,
Yeah.
you know, when we got stopped in the car we was driving and people
Which
are
people
saying,
also accuse you of lying about.
yes, saying that I said the driver's black when the driver's really white.
Yeah.
Why would I say that? The conspiracy theories to me are off the scale. And because it's very hard for me to compute all of that, I'm just like, this is madness. Like, am I the only one going mad? But, you know, Twitter is good and bad. You know, the good thing
for
about
sure.
Twitter was all of a sudden people were like, Dawn's right.
Yeah.
Dawn's right. And that gathered momentum. Dawn's right. Dawn's right. And then that was it.
So I usually end by asking people what ambitions they have left, but you've not had ambition in a conventional sense, and therefore I suspect that you want to carry on living a purposeful life, really.
Yeah. And actually that's really interesting because people always used to say, yeah, what do you want to do? Do you want to be Prime Minister? And I never had that.
No, I've gathered that in the course of this conversation.
Yeah, but you're right. But then, so writing the book, I was like, okay, what do you want to do? And I thought, I would love to, you know, when Sadiq stands down, I'll put my hat in the ring for Mayor of London if I've still got the energy by then. Yeah, and that's one of my ambitions. And it is actually sort of one of the first times where I've said, actually, this is something that I really want to do.
I think you said when Sadiq stands down, isn't it? I think it's if.
If he stands down, and if I've still got the energy by the time he stands down, because if I'm tired and like he's standing down when he's like in his 60s or whatever, I'll be like, it's all right. I'll go and do my TV shows instead, or do documentaries.
And until then?
Until then, James, I will continue to fight the good fight. I will continue to do my very best to break down systems and structures that are not working for everyone.
A Purposeful Life by Dawn Butler MP. What I've learned about breaking barriers and inspiring change is out now. Dawn Butler, thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed that.
Good. So did I.